Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. A couple weeks ago, I did a video on the best young adult fantasy for older readers. And it's because there's a lot of discussion in this community around what young adult fantasy is trying to be, who it's trying to appeal to, and I think a lot of people are very confused on the age range and kind of target audience of young adult fantasy because so much of it reads older. However, young adult fantasy's intended audience is supposed to be from 12 to 18-year-olds. And while I definitely think that there's a wide range of people and ages that can enjoy all of these stories, some young adult fantasy definitely reads more for that intended audience of teenagers, and some of it reads maybe a little bit older. Maybe it explores some darker themes that can be appreciated not only by teens but by older readers as well. So these books today I'm going to talk about are more of the books that I probably myself would have enjoyed so much more had I been younger when I read them. And being a 20-something-year-old now, I'm like, these are a little bit too young for me. So all of these I think are great books to pick up, but I definitely think that if you're a teenager from that 12 to 18 age range, you're going to really love these. So let's just get right into it. First being Karvall by Stephanie Garber. So this is a magical circus atmosphere in this book, and while I personally wasn't crazy about it, so many people adore this series. I think it's got a lot of potential and a lot to love about it. It's got a lot of mystery and just really cool atmosphere and writing. The characters and kind of their focus is very heavy on the romance. So if you're more of a reader who loves like a good romance in your young adult fantasies, or really likes some like wild twists and turns and this kind of carnival atmosphere, I think you're really going to enjoy Karvall and the rest of the series as well, because it wasn't bad. It just wasn't something that blew me away, but I would definitely still recommend checking it out. The next book I have was Eragon by Christopher Paolini. So this is a very well-known fantasy book, and I actually read it for the first time as like a 25-year-old. So for me, it wasn't something that was very nostalgic, and going in and reading it as an older reader, I could definitely appreciate what it was doing and I really enjoyed it, but I would have enjoyed it so much more had I read it when I was a teenager. This has so much to love about it. It's almost like the young adult Lord of the Rings, if you will. I think Christopher Paolini was heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings, and it's got a lot of great characters. It's got dragon companions, so that's something to love about it. And it does feel very epic in nature. So if you're looking for a really fun, epic fantasy adventure story that has a lot of dragons in it, this is going to be so good for you. The next book I have is a Mulan retelling, and that is Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. I read this last year, and I was meh about it, but I do think that this would be amazing for teenagers. Lots to love in this. It starts off as this very like Asian-inspired Mulan retelling about this girl who enters this competition to become the king's tailor, essentially, and has to, it's almost like Project Runway meets Mulan. So if that sounds like something you would really love, then I highly recommend checking this out. I think the writing in it was beautiful. There's a romance in it, so if you like that in your books, you'll really enjoy this. So it personally wasn't for me, but I do think a lot of people are going to really enjoy this. The next book I have is a very popular young adult fantasy series, and that is Kiss of Deception, which is the first book in the Remnant Chronicles. Again, if I had read this as a teenager, like in middle school or high school, I would have loved this. I loved the romance in this. Even though I couldn't appreciate it to its fullest, it was still really well done, and the main character has such an amazing arc through all three books. I think it was really well written, so I highly recommend checking out the Remnant Chronicles if you haven't already, and if you're more of that 12 to 18 age range, because this has so much to offer. Great characters, great romance, great action, great writing. It's got it all. So on my young adult fantasy for older readers list, I had Six of Crows and that duology by Leigh Bardugo. And on this list, I'm including Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. This is one of the few books that is on this list that I absolutely loved. I loved this book, and I read it as like a 24-year-old, 25-year-old, and I loved it. I loved all the tropes in this. It definitely has the chosen one trope. It's got a lot of tropes in it, but that's what makes it so fun, and I loved the characters. There's a love triangle. There's definitely like a very much like hate to love type villain in this story, and it's becoming a Netflix show. So if you haven't picked this up already and you are a younger reader, oh my goodness, I'm so jealous that you get to experience it for the first time. I love this world. I loved all of the magic in it, and it just was so much fun. It was very easy to just get lost in and just root for these characters. So good. The next book I have is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. This is a sci-fi retelling of Cinderella, and it's definitely a lot of fun. Now, these books are pretty predictable because they are fairy tale retellings, so you pretty much know how they're going to end. But it's a beloved series for a reason. There's 4 books in the Lunar Chronicles, and all of them have different main characters that you're following, and it all kind of comes together at the end. The romance in this series, very strong. There's a lot of romance throughout this whole series, but I really enjoyed it. I think some romances were better than others. Overall, this was a really fun series. It almost felt like I was reading a novelization of Sailor Moon at certain points. So if you're a fan of Sailor Moon and you like your fairy tale retellings and this sounds interesting, I definitely recommend. Now, everybody's heard of Cassandra Clare and the Mortal Instruments. My personal favorite Cassandra Clare series that I've read was The Clockwork Angel, which is the first book in the what is this called? In the Infernal Devices trilogy. I personally like this one more because it's very 19th century inspired. It's got a lot of this really cool atmosphere and setting that I really enjoyed getting lost in. I personally love the characters in this book, the love triangle in it. Usually I hate love triangles, and for some reason this one totally worked for me. I loved it, and that last book and how it ends is just so heartbreaking. So I personally highly recommend The Infernal Devices. Even if you read The Mortal Instruments and weren't crazy about it, this is still such a good series. The last 2 books I have are both more sci-fi. The first being 1,000 Pieces of You, which is the first book in the Firebird trilogy. I think this is severely underrated. Essentially, it follows this girl who has to jump to alternate realities where she occupies different bodies of herself that exist in different realities than her own to try and find her father's killer. And it's really cool how it explores the alternate realities and how one decision that one person makes can create a whole new world for everyone to live in. It's so much fun exploring these different realities. I don't think that the character work was necessarily the strongest part of this. I just really loved the world building and the whole concept behind it. I thought it was so cool, and I loved all 3 books, so I definitely recommend this one. Even if you're an older reader, I read this as an older reader and I still loved it. So I think that this one appeals definitely to teens, but also maybe to older readers as well. The last book I just had to have on one of these lists, and I don't totally know where it goes. So leave your comments down below if you have strong feelings about whether this appeals more towards the older end of young adult or the younger end of young adult, because I don't know, truly. And that is Illuminate, which is the first book in the Illuminate Files trilogy. I loved this book. This was a 5-star book for me. It is one of the coolest sci-fi books I've read, and it actually is what really got me into sci-fi. I would say this book and then reading Dark Matter by Blake Crouch kind of solidified my interest in sci-fi and wanting to read more from the genre. So this is such a fun ride. It's all told in these case files where you're reading through like chat rooms, you're reading from surveillance videos, you're reading from like just these emails and stuff. It's the coolest thing. Such a fun experience. Like, look how That is so cool. And it definitely has like a lot of twists and turns. It has an artificial intelligence character that is one of my favorite book characters ever. And when he comes into the story, you will know exactly who I'm talking about. I love the Illuminate files. I still think that any age can enjoy this. I just wasn't sure which video to put it in. I definitely wanted to get it in here as one of the top young adult series for me. So highly recommend, no matter who you are, no matter what age you are, read this book. And then the last series I have is one that I no longer have physically, but it's still one that definitely is in my mind, and that is the Falling Kingdoms series. It is, I believe, in total 6 books, and I read all 6 books, and I will say that this definitely is more for the younger end of young adult. However, it is still so much fun. I would describe it as the young adult version of Game of Thrones because you're following a lot of different perspectives and you're following very much like a political empire and how different factions within this empire are kind of warring against each other. These characters are very, very angsty. They're full on angst. It's like if you want angsty romance and banter, then this is definitely the series for you. In my personal opinion, I think it starts off stronger than it ends, but I would still recommend it, and I think that I would have loved this. It would have probably been one of my top series ever had I read it when I was a teenager because it was so much fun. So I can't recommend it enough. Definitely pick up the Falling Kingdom series. So those are my recommendations for young adult fantasy books that are more towards the younger end of the genre. What do you think of this list? Do you disagree? Do you think that a lot of these maybe are more for the older readers, or are they just for anybody? And that's my thing, is I read young adult fantasy all the time. I definitely think any age can enjoy it. I just notice sometimes when I'm reading that some of it leans a little bit younger than others, and that's kind of what I'm trying to parse out with these lists, is which ones I've found that read a little bit younger versus a little bit older. So definitely let me know what you think of these lists. Go check out the one for the older readers if you want to know what I think of that list. And thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And until next time, bye.